This book really should have never been written. The film should have never been made.
I sort of have this feeling that one of the reasons I was born, was to be part of this, to get this out into the culture.
What they didn't count on was the word of mouth, that people would see it and then just say, oh my God, you have to go see this movie. It ended up defying the odds.
Midnight Library of Baseball presents Season 2, The Making of Field of Dreams. From unlikely inception to enduring impact across generations. And as always, no loud music or jarring sounds. I'm Ben Orlando. In 1933, British author James Hilton wrote the novel Lost Horizon, about a group of travelers who crash in the mountains of northern Asia and come across a strange village where the inhabitants live extremely long lives. Lost Horizon became hugely popular. It was the first mass-market paperback. It spawned a film version directed by Frank Capra, known for directing It's a Wonderful Life. And the book's lasting legacy was its popularization of the mythical village called Shangri-La. I was in college when I first learned this story, and I became enthralled. And then when I learned that Hilton's Shangri-La was likely inspired by a real mountain village called Hunza in Pakistan, where the people actually lived well over 100, I became obsessed. I read everything I could find about Hunza and the people there. And over that summer, I sat down and I wrote a full-blown novel, my first novel, which blended elements from Lost Horizon and the real-life story of Hunza. The novel was never published. The writing was pretty bad, but I still have a hard copy in a plastic binder in my closet. Years later, as I was searching for a new episode idea for my podcast, Midnight Library of Baseball, I looked into Field of Dreams, a movie I loved, and I came across this article which said that the fictional character of Doc Moonlight Graham, played by Burt Lancaster, was based on a real person. And there I was again, pulling back the curtain of a magic act to reveal a reality as mesmerizing as the illusion. This fascinating fictional character was also a fascinating man who lived on this earth, who breathed the same air I breathed, who looked up at the same sun I looked up at every day. And now, for me, the seed was planted. And so I created that podcast and then created a reel on Instagram about it. And Instagram exploded. Just like me, hundreds of thousands of people loved the story of Doc Graham, and they loved Field of Dreams. People wrote all kinds of comments about how much they loved the story and the film. One person quoted Graham and said, quote, "We just don't recognize life's most significant moments while they're happening. Back then I thought, there'll be other days. Well, there were no other days." End quote. Other people commented about their love of baseball. Someone said they were from Chisholm, Minnesota, where Graham lived and died. And somebody actually said Graham was her mother's doctor. Can you believe that? So it happened so quickly, these degrees of separation just disappear. One moment, Doc Graham for me is this fictional character. And then, amazingly, he's this real person with these dashed dreams, but also a resilient story. And then I'm interacting with a woman whose mother went to see Doc Graham. Doc Graham was her doctor. It's incredible. And this is just one grain of sand on the beach of this entire incredible story. And for me, the journey was still in progress. It wasn't until several episodes later, when I was working on a comparison between Field of Dreams and The Natural, when something clicked and I heard the voice clearly, which honestly, it was more of this internal truth that I felt in my body. And the truth was, My motivation for doing this nostalgic baseball podcast was rooted in my childhood and my history with my father. It was like the more I researched and focused on Field of Dreams and the stories within, the more I chipped away at the truth hidden behind distraction and denial. When I think about why I'm doing this, the image of a gold prospector in the hills of California or Alaska pops into my mind. The film itself has its own nuggets, but with Moonlight Graham, I found another massive chunk. I wanted to find more, and I have, and I keep finding it, and now I want to dig up the entire vein. But in this case, gold is contradiction and haunting coincidence. Gold is unbelievable twists and turns and unlikely developments. Gold is success and creation against improbable odds. Gold is connection and loss and second chances. When we hear a good story, one of our first impulses is to share the story. We want others to feel the same way we felt. That's what happened with so many people in Field of Dreams. And that's how I feel now. I'm holding up this big pile of gold glistening in the sun, and I'm excited to share it with everyone, so others can feel the way I felt throughout this incredible journey. In each episode of this season, I'll explore one important stage of Field of Dreams, from casting to production to legacy, to inspiration dating back more than 100 years. And in each episode, I'm going to include a story from you, the listener, and what baseball and Field of Dreams have meant to you in your life. And tonight we'll start the journey with the story of Lawrence Kessenich, the man who pretended to be a literary editor in order to convince author W.P. Kinsella to become Kessenich's first client. From this unlikely turn, history was made. First, let me provide a brief summary of the film, Field of Dreams. And if you haven't seen it, or haven't seen it in a while, I highly recommend a rewatch. Here's the summary. A struggling Iowa farmer on the verge of bankruptcy hears a voice that tells him to cut down his corn and build the baseball field. The voice says, "If you build it, he will come." Well, Ray Kinsella builds the field, and everyone except his wife and daughter think he's crazy. But soon the ghost of shoeless Joe Jackson walks out of the corn and onto the field. And then Jackson brings his teammates, also ghosts. And it's fantastic, it's magical, it's everything Ray Kinsella could have hoped for. But the voice isn't done. It tells Ray to travel across the country and kidnap a reclusive author, and then find a doctor and former ballplayer who died years ago. Somehow Ray finds these lost souls and brings them back to the field, and they get their second chances. What Ray doesn't know until the end, and, spoiler alert, is that one of the ghost ball players that Shoeless Joe brings back is Ray's father, John Kinsella. If you build it, he will come. This is the backbone of the film. And one last piece of the story is the line from Terrence Mann, the reclusive author, who says, "People will come, Ray." And they do, with the film ending at night and an aerial shot of miles and miles of cars on their way to the field to pay money to watch a miracle. So that's the basic plot of Field of Dreams. And now I invite you to come along with me on our first leg of the journey as we take a look at the crazy, improbable story of how Field of Dreams came to be. Before there was the film, Field of Dreams, there was the novel, Shoeless Joe. And before that, there was only a 16-page short story with no prospects of being anything more. Then in stepped Lawrence Kessenich. Lawrence Kessenich has flourished in all branches of literature. He's an award-winning poet and playwright. He's published essays, short stories, and a novel. and the books he's worked on as an editor have won numerous awards. But before any of these achievements, when Kessenich was just starting out, he risked his reputation and career because of 2 lines he read about a short story that took place in Iowa. All right. So I know you go by Larry, Lawrence. What do you prefer?
Lawrence. I go by
Lawrence.
Lawrence.
Okay. Okay, Lawrence. Well, thanks so much. I feel like I'm at the beginning of my journey here, my road trip across the country, finding people and analogies that keep coming as I
Yeah.
continue to do
So
research.
what led you to do this? This particular
So
show?
I started doing this podcast, Midnight Library of Baseball, which before I actually knew it was kind of influenced with this Field of Dreams vibe. Like I like looking at the untold stories like Freakonomics or Malcolm Gladwell, but also the emotional, the nostalgic part of baseball. So that's what I've been doing. And I've done a couple episodes here and there around Field of Dreams and Doc Graham, and the response that I've received is enormous. And as I'm doing this, I feel this voice, and I ignored it for a while, and it feels kind
I
of
mean,
cheesy, but then it's true, it's like
yep.
there's a voice, keep doing this, and my dad and my history, and also, I've been reading a lot of books and doing research, and it doesn't seem like anywhere there's this comprehensive front to back telling of the story of Field of Dreams, of Shoeless Joe, of all of these different stories within stories from the beginning to the end. So that's what I'm trying to
Yeah.
do here.
Yeah, I'll tell you. And I mean, I felt this myself when I originally started working on the book. Just what you're talking about, this sense of it should be done. It's something that should be done, and had a sort of faded quality to it. Because just to give you one example, I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Wisconsin, so right next door to Iowa. My father was raised on a farm, so I'm acquainted with that kind of, to a certain extent, with that world. And I came east, kind of on a, not exactly a whim, but I came out for graduate school in creative writing. Was only able to stay there for one semester because I ran out of money. Then I went to the Radcliffe publishing course, and that's what led me into book publishing. So I felt like I had, and that I had sort of followed my dream, to a different part of the country. And so that's part of the reason that the story spoke to me. There was that sort of odyssey, a sort of important journey in a life. That part really spoke to me. And I can tell you the whole story about the book, how the book happened. That's also this complete shot in the dark thing. I mean, it's a little bit crazy because I was an assistant to an editor, so basically there were two titles. One was editorial assistant, and the other was next step was assistant editor. Well, I was
Mm-hmm.
not even an assistant editor yet. I was an editorial assistant, which basically is either secretary to an editor. Now, if your editor's, helpful and really wants to help your career along, he'll give you things to read, he'll give you things to edit, you'll work with authors, and my boss, Roby McCauley, had done that to a certain extent. But I realized, and then of course there's all these other editorial assistants, and the editor in chief was always saying, chances of your being an editor are almost nil, like they're minimal. Your chances are so small, so few people get it, blah, blah, blah. He was always very discouraging, the opposite of what you want. But I took that to heart, and I realized that all of us here are capable of editing. We've all got enough skill with language that we can edit. But the other important skill is being able to acquire books.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, I'm going to prove that I can find books. And this was when I was still an assistant to an editor. I was not even officially an editor yet. When I heard about Bill's story, and the way I heard about it was, I'm sure you read my article in Published Weekly. So, Publishers Weekly is the first place that a book appears, that you'll ever even learn that it exists in most cases. So we all read it. And so I read this review of a book called, shoot, I forget the name of it, but it was basically a best Canadian short stories. That's what the subtitle was. And there was one sentence. It said, in one of the stories, an Iowa farmer builds a baseball diamond in his cornfield in order to invoke his baseball hero, Shoeless Joe Jackson. And I thought, oh my God, what a fantastic idea. I mean, it just seemed so rich and interesting. And of course, tied into my background with the Midwest and the farm and everything. And so at that, I was so naive at that time. When I read that, I thought, oh my God, every editor in the business is going to see this idea and they're going to go after him.
Uh-huh.
Well, as it turned out, that wasn't true. Although I think he may have heard from a couple people. But you know what it is with the Publishers Weekly, you don't even have the book yet. It's not available. But I thought, I've got to get a jump on other people. So I wrote him. I wrote Bill Kinsella and I said, I'm really interested in this idea. Is it something that you might be interested in expanding into a novel? So he wrote back to me. Oh, this is another great story about, like, you make no money in book publishing, right? So it's so little money that I couldn't afford to buy the book when it came out. And so I had actually written him already, but I hadn't heard back. And then it showed up in the bookstores around Christmas time. And I went to a bookstore in Harvard Square and I stood there and read the short story in the store because I couldn't afford to buy the book. And the book was called, the short story was called Shoeless Joe Jackson Comes to Iowa. And I just fell in love with it. I just thought, oh my God, this is so interesting and so good and so rich. So, and then very shortly after that, I heard from him and he said, I'd love to write a novel. I've never been able to do it. And nobody's ever offered to help me. So I wrote back, I said, I'll help you, I'll help you get started. And so I asked him to send me everything he'd written up to that point, which turned out to be more than
More than you expected.
because he had 3 or 4 books of short stories already. I don't know if you know much about his career, but he did several books set on Indian reservations in Canada. And they're so true to life that they've actually been taught in reservation schools, even though he's a, white Irish, but he had an Indian girlfriend for a while. So he spent some time on reservations. But you know how it is with a writer, your imagination is able to take over these things. And so he's able to create those books. And he sent me a whole slew of other stories, just manuscripts of things that hadn't been published. And I went through all this stuff. I read every single bit of it. And I ended up right back at Shoeless Joe Jackson Comes to Iowa. It was so good. And it felt like it had the seeds of something bigger in it. That's all I can tell you. It just was an intuition. So I called him up and told him that. I said, I think this would be the beginning of a great novel, or it could be. I said, do you have any other ideas, that you might be able to use to expand this? Well, then we brought out the idea of somebody kidnapping J.D. Salinger and take him to a baseball game. The idea of the thing about Doc Graham, his whole story. And so he said, I'm sort of imagining this Odyssey where this guy, goes out there and takes Salinger, and then he ends up coming back. He wasn't clear what it was going to be, but the idea was strong enough that he thought he could start on it. So I told him to start with the short story because the short story was so strong. And he said, yeah, well, I could do that, but basically it's the beginning of the movie when he's on the farm, he hears the voice, he does all the crazy stuff. Everybody thinks he's nuts, builds the field, and then Shoeless Joe Jackson appears and he's with his daughter and watching him play and talking about him. And that's where the story ends. And as I said, I just thought it was so strong that he start with that. And he said he didn't want to, he had another approach. I said, you're the one who has to write it, so go ahead. So about 5 months later, he sends me, I think it was probably about 60 or 70, maybe 75 pages, something like that. And to be honest, it was terrible. I mean, And I learned that about him. He's a very uneven writer. He would write something brilliant and he would write something that was really bad.
Uh,
And I was so dismayed. I thought, oh my God, I'm committed to this guy and I've gotten him going on this novel and it's just not good. So this is the first time I ever, of course, faced that with doing that with an author, trying to advise them on something like that. And I just said, well, I got to do it because I'm never going to, the publishing house is never going to accept it in this state.
yeah.
So I said, look, I think you've got a false start here. I really want you to start with that short story and write up to that level. And after that, he just took off and he wrote the rest of the novel. I didn't have to intervene at any particular point. Of course, I edited it when it was done, but he didn't need any more input or redirection or anything like that. He really came up with the whole thing after that, starting with the short story and continuing in that vein.
I mean, I'm having a lot of feelings come up now as you're talking about this
Yeah.
from the perspective of a writer and, you know, Bill Kinsella having this person, who's
Mhm.
believing in him. It's like for the first time in this. I mean, he went to Iowa writing,
Yeah.
and that was a big deal. But to have this confidence, to have this faith, and he's sending you bad writing, and you're saying, no, let's go back, let's do it again. I'm still supporting you. I mean, that's invaluable.
Yeah.
And
And
yeah,
he was always, I mean, Bill was a great guy. He was very, he always gave me credit, for, saying he said, I would not have gotten started on this book the way I did, without this editor's input. And, it was sort of I was really taking a flyer here. I was not an editor. I mean, I could not
yeah,
officially accept the book, but I knew if I had a good book and presented it to my editor, he'd go for it. And of course, that's what happened. And ended up winning the Houghton Mifflin Literary Fellowship, which you should know. One thing you should know about that is it was not an annual award. It was
hmm,
only given when they felt they had something that was strong enough and
wow,
original that it deserved it. So it was quite an honor for him and for me as an editor for the book to get that that award.
yeah,
And everybody, there's just something about, and you seem to feel it too. There's just something about this story. People just loved it. They just fell in love with it from the beginning. Everybody at the publishing house, and then when they sent it out to other people. I mean, it's a flawed novel, I'll be honest. I mean, when I look at it, when I reread it now, I kind of go, oh boy, I could have done more editing on this. And I think that, speaking of Field of Dreams, one thing that Phil Alden Robinson did was he really captured the kernel of the book. He honed it down to the strongest part of it. And I think that's why that movie is so incredible. Luckily, Bill never told me this when he was writing it, but he was kind of sort of banking on this novel, that this novel would be a success because he was trying to make his living. He was making his living as a writer.
yeah,
And to invest, 6 months to a year in one project, that's a big investment. And if I'd known that, I think I would have been terrified, but luckily I didn't. Um, and it all worked out very well in the end. But
yeah. Well, and he was writing short stories, and at the time it was more possible, right, in the late 70s, early 80s, to do short story compilations, definitely compared to
yeah,
now.
for
Um,
sure. And to get them
that's
published somewhere, in
yeah,
magazines and that sort of thing. So,
right. I mean, that's really interesting too, thinking about the timing and like now, would that be possible? Would you have seen that? Would someone have seen that? And you took the role of an agent as well as an editor and really kind
right,
of,
yeah.
I know you said for uh Bill Kinsella's book, like it just wasn't working. And then once he got going, it was flowing. Like, was there
Right.
anything in terms of on the line level, in terms of cohesion of characters that you were looking for in the editing process or helping him hone?
It was clear to me in that original sample that it was just kind of all over the place.
Hmm.
And, the story wasn't being told very effectively. It didn't draw you in. The short story was absolutely riveting. I mean, it's one of the best short stories I've ever read. And so I that's the way I was expecting him to write, and then turns out didn't always write that way. So I hope it helped him. Something must have clicked for him when I told him to try to write to that level. So he must have understood. There must be part of him that understood that there was something special in that short story that he had to try to capture and carry through the whole book. And I think he did that. I mean, even though there's some slack moments in the book, I think overall the book is has a great story arc. So I think he had a very strong. Once he started working off of the short story, he seemed to have a feel for what the rest of the story should be and how it should tie into that original story.
What was your reaction when you were reading about Salinger as a character in his
Oh,
movies?
Salinger is one of my favorite writers. Actually did an independent study on him in college. I just loved his work so much. I just thought it was an absolutely wonderful idea, to do, especially somebody who's so reclusive and nobody knows anything about. It's sort of a fantasy we all might have who admire him as a writer, to kidnapping him and be able to spend some time with him. So I just thought it was a delightful idea. Interesting though, and this is one of my most favorite stories from this whole process. So the book got published, and then they started negotiating about the movie. And of course, this was getting some press. Well, I get a call from the corporate lawyer at Houghton Mifflin. They were actually we were in an old Park Street, brownstone right across the street from Boston Common. It was a great old building with a cage elevator, and it was an amazing place. But the rest of Houghton Mifflin, the textbook division and all the other divisions were over in a sort of high-rise building a block away. So he said, "Come on over here. I need to talk to you about this." So it has to do with Shoeless Joe. So I go over and he said, "So I got this letter from J.D. Salinger's lawyers." And I said, "Oh, interesting." He said, "I won't read you all the legalese, but I'll sum it up for you. Basically, they're saying, we think it's cute that you decided to use J.D. Salinger as a character in a novel. Don't even think about using him as a character in a movie."
Mhm.
Because Phil, the writer and director, at one point, when he talks about why he didn't use Salinger, I can't remember the reason he gives, but he's just misremembering. He could not have used Salinger as a character if he wanted to. And I'm sure we
Yeah.
told him that because at that point, he had the option, to make the movie. And I'm sure that the lawyer called him and said, "Look, sorry, but you're going to have to find somebody else." And I think Phil found an absolutely brilliant solution coming up with that character. And of course, getting
James Earl Jones.
yeah, to do
Yeah.
that part. Man,
Yeah.
that was absolutely brilliant casting. And
Well, I
so,
mean, it's not a typical move. One of my favorite
oh,
authors, Paul Auster, like he often pulls that off, right? Mixing the real with the fantasy, but including a real life character, especially someone like that who's reclusive in a novel. Like it's
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, you can get away with it. It's a little harder to get away with in a movie, apparently, or at least if you're J.D. Salinger's.
Yeah. Well, I think I was watching it was Bill Kinsella who was talking about this. He's like, well, they did have an argument, but it would have gone to court and said, yeah, so I am this really reclusive curmudgeon, and he portrayed me as this really nice guy. So it really misrepresented my character.
Yeah, yeah. The funny story is that Phil, when he finally got a studio to take it, and they would have called it Field of Dreams, he absolutely hated the name. He hated it. And he was really nervous about telling, because they were insisting on it. He didn't really have control over it. So he was going to have to tell Bill. So he calls up Kinsella, and Kinsella says, and this is true, he said, "Well, the original title of the book was Dreamfields. So I'm fine with that name." And Phil was just shocked. And I thought Dreamfields was a horrible name myself. That's why it got changed. But the studio said, Shoeless Joe, it sounds like it's about a homeless guy. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it's a good point, but I know who Joe Jackson was, so it didn't have that kind of resonance for me when I read it. When we came up with the idea. Um, but it is fun. I mean, that is such a bizarre coincidence that they got that close to what
Hmm.
his
Yeah.
first title was. Um,
Well, speaking of coincidence, I was communicating with the author of Kinsella's biography,
oh
uh,
yeah, yeah.
Willie Steele, um, and then I communicated with him, I think on Thursday or Friday, and he got back to me on Saturday, and he's like, "Oh, by the way, it's WP Kinsella's birthday, or it would have been his birthday."
Oh my
Like
gosh,
that's yesterday.
it's so funny. I'd forgotten.
Yeah,
That was,
yeah. It's like I can't. Like
yeah,
I don't know if it's doing this where the coincidence just kind of comes up more and you start making these connections, or if there is
yeah,
something going on here. But
yeah, yeah.
I,
Well,
I,
I'll tell you, people were so passionate when I was fortunate enough to be, involved in when they filmed it here at Fenway Park, the scene at Fenway Park. You have to look very closely, but you can, between their two heads, Kevin Costner and James Earl Jones. First, you see my wife, and then at one point, James Earl Jones leans forward and I kissed her. I did it on purpose because I was hoping it would get on camera, and sure enough, it did.
I'm gonna
Um,
look for that.
yeah, and everybody who's involved in this just just is so excited about it. I mean, people would like gave up other projects so they could be part of it once they read the script. And there's something magical about that. And obviously, that's borne out in the way it's, as I said earlier, it's become part of the culture. Well, in the way the field, I mean, talk about life imitating art. The field
Hmm.
became exactly what they were dreaming of it being at the end of the
Yeah.
movie. It's like, this is just wild.
One of the things that you mentioned with Dwyer's book is all these stories, all the people that came up to him.
Yeah.
And like I really want to talk to a lot of people and hear their stories. And
Yeah.
I mean, this brings me back to you, and because I know you've written about your father, and as you were working on this project and reading Bill Kinsella's book, like, you
Mhm.
feel this connection? Was it um, resonating with you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, my father and I had some really rough times in the late 60s. I was in college from 1968 to, well, it ended up being 74 because I kind of meandered through college, but started in 68. So it was a crazy time. And my father was in the National Guard. He was actually, his full-time job was in the National Guard. And he was much more conservative than I was in many ways. He was also a very devout and conservative Catholic, and I was living with somebody. I mean, I pushed all the wrong buttons, and so we had some very very intense interactions. I wrote that essay that was on NPR about um, this point where he's never, I mean, he spanked us when we were kids. A lot of us got spanked in that era. It was just a fairly common thing to get a few raps on your butt if you got out of hand. But other than that, he never ever did any kind of physical. He was
Mm.
never nasty in a physical way. And we were standing at the table, kitchen time, opposite ends of the kitchen table, after this was after supper. We were just in there just going at, and he started coming around the table with his fist like this. And I thought, holy shit, I've really, and then he broke down crying and went into his bedroom
Oh,
because he could not believe that he'd gotten to the point where he's actually ready to hit me. So yeah, we had some intense times, but we got over that and uh, became, well, he wasn't somebody you could get really close to, but he was a warm person. He was
yeah.
a loving person. And so anyway, it was just nice. And I just feel like, especially people in my generation, just fathers were not, they weren't very often affectionate. They
Hmm.
unmanly to be,
Yeah. Yeah.
affectionate and loving, demonstratively. Not that you didn't know it, but to demonstrate it. And he also grew into that. I mean, he got to the point where he loved it when people would come and everybody'd hug, and um, so
Yeah.
he changed over his lifetime. But again, I think that's something that this movie gave men permission to do that.
One thing that comes up for me, because it's kind of a little game that my wife and I play, mostly me, but we think about things in history that are inevitable and things that aren't. It's like, oh,
Interesting.
like the wheel or the automobile, these would have happened one way or another eventually, but
Mhm.
what things it really was a fluke or it really wouldn't have happened. Like
That's
we're
it.
seeing this exists because of one person, because this confluence of events. And
Yeah. Yeah.
this is one of those things.
Yeah.
And you are part of that. And I have so much appreciation for you really being part of this and taking this short story and again, not only saying, yeah, I think there's something here from an editor's perspective, but that human perspective. I support you.
Yeah.
And right,
Yeah.
that's really special.
Yeah, I was going to mention earlier when we were talking about just about it being such a cultural thing, and the impact of this movie. I don't know if you're a fan of Ted Lasso, but to me, it has
Hmm.
very similar that of just the kind of thing. We're actually rewatching it right now, and I just cannot watch an episode of that with my heart just my heart just feels full, and I'm always sort of on the edge of tears. Um, and I think it's in the second or third episode he mentions Field of Dreams. I can't remember what the context is, but I went, "This is perfect." The torch has been passed.
Yeah.
To a generation.
Well, that was one of the things I brought up with Dwyer because in his book, he has this line about when it came out, I thought the movie was too sweet and I don't know another word he used, but to become popular. And it's like today that's true too, because Ted Lasso really stands out among, and my wife and I are just so tired of this, like the shows and the movies. It's just like the structure of conflict and this
Yeah.
negative happens. And it's like you can't do a story that's just positive and hopeful. And here's Field of Dreams where, oh my God, the husband, the main character, his wife, he and his wife get along. She supports him, right?
Right.
And we're
Right.
still wanting to go along with it. We're still really interested. Like, why can't that be a model for more work?
Yeah, and in both of those, in both Field of Dreams and Ted Lasso, people have to overcome adversity all the time. It's not like
Right.
it's like everything is easy. It's not. That's not the message of it. But the message of it is you can help each other. You can support each other as you go through these things and as you deal with these difficulties. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you, I mean, it's the biggest thing in my life. I mean, just having been part of something that, as I said earlier, has become part of the culture, and but more importantly, has affected so many people in a positive emotional way. Um, that just I mean, this is going to sound a little bit maybe overstated, but I didn't stay in book publishing, and
Mhm.
I sort of have this feeling that one of the reasons I was born, was to be part of this, to get this out into the culture, because the issue of men and their emotions has been something, because I've always been very emotional, and it was very difficult when I was young, for a boy to be that way. And so that's part of what, of course, attracted me to this whole thing. And it just feels like such an honor to have been part of getting something out there that speaks to that in such a profound way for so many people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have this reticence when I'm reaching out and asking people to talk about this because it's like, oh, you've talked about this 1,000 times. I don't want to ask repeating the same questions. And here we go again. It's like, how do I ask it in a different way and, bring up different things? But I mean, as you're saying this, like you're still excited to talk about it because it's so
Oh yeah,
meaningful.
exactly. Yeah, don't worry
Yeah.
about I think anybody who's ever been part of it, it will always be an important thing in their life. And Dwyer, I love Dwyer's story about he actually dreamed of being in a movie that was like what's it called?
It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful
That,
Life.
uh,
It's like a perfect comparison, I mean,
yeah,
it's a very, I'm not as big a fan of that movie as Field of Dreams, but just in the end, become part of the culture, and so many people are affected by it and moved by it, and you actually end up being in a movie that's really comparable to that, and it's his big,
yeah.
that was, and again, he sort of feels like as part of what he was born to do, to be part of something like this. So
Well, Lawrence, thank you so much for taking the time and talking with me.
you're
Uh,
welcome.
yeah, I will absolutely reach out to you if I have other questions. And again, I appreciate your warmth.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My
Yeah.
pleasure. As you say, I'm always love talking about it. So,
All right. Well,
all
hopefully
right,
we'll be
Ben.
in
Great
touch.
to
And
talk to
thanks
you. It
again.
was a
Okay,
pleasure.
Lawrence.
Bye.
Bye. In addition to editing Shoeless Joe, Lawrence Kessenich also edited Kinsella's next novel, The Iowa Baseball Confederacy, and he counseled Kinsella on a number of other projects, including Kinsella's final novel, Butterfly Winter. And as so many stories in this project come full circle, so does Lawrence Kessenich's, as he later edited the book written by Dwyer Brown, the actor who played John Kinsella. But we'll come back to that and Lawrence Kessenich later in the series. Part of this series is hearing from listeners like you about what Field of Dreams and baseball in general has meant to you. So here's one of those stories from Terry Powers of Michigan.
Field of Dreams is one of those movies. Number one, I own a copy, and I probably own a copy of maybe 10 movies. But that's a movie that when I see that it's on, I will tune in no matter what point of the movie, and will watch it till the end and will cry. It just had that effect on me. The first time I saw it, I was crying uncontrollably because it had such an impact on me. And I have a buddy whose dad actually was a very good college baseball player, and my buddy played baseball in college too. And he had the same reaction that I did. We've talked about it a lot over the years. And I just believe it's because of, the being raised by a father who loved the game, and the other extenuating circumstances of life. And the Field of Dreams movie is more of a movie that takes you somewhere, in your own life. Field of Dreams, I think it has a message. It won't ring true for everybody, but the people it does ring true for it's pretty powerful. In fact, just telling the story to you a second ago, I got a little teary-eyed. So it's funny how that works. My dad was born in 1919, youngest of 10 kids. His father left the family right after he was born, so the kids all had to, chip in and work and earn money to help, my grandmother, raise 10 kids. And he, in fact, and given the times, obviously, he couldn't do that today. His first job was driving a flour truck at age 12. But he also played baseball, and he loved baseball, and sadly had to drop out of high school because he was hoping to play baseball in high school, and wound up going into the Marine Corps, served in World War II, came out, started raising a family in the Chicago area. He was a Cubs fan, so he brainwashed me into being a Cubs fan, which I've done with my oldest son. My younger one is a Tigers fan because we live in Michigan now, and that's where they grew up. But the older one's a Cubs fan. He's young Terry. I tease him about that. 42 years old, but I give him a hard time about that. But my dad got me interested in the game, and I loved it, and I would often play catch with him in the yard, and he'd tell me stories about when he played. Now, however, how many of them were true, I don't know, and it doesn't matter. But it was a fond memory for me. And then when the movie came out, and I thought, well, it sounds kind of interesting. I'll have to watch it. And the reaction I had to the thing was just so powerful. I just had to, I had to go see him. I wasn't doing well health-wise, and so we took a trip. I found out that the field was an actual, the movie site was an actual tourist attraction. It was kind of on the way. So I talked my wife into going, and we went, and I think my kids were like, maybe the youngest was 4 or 5, and then my older son was 9 or 10, and then our daughter was 2 years older than that. When we went there, I mean, it was just the field, and we did the whole thing. The kids ran the bases, they went into the corn, and they were actually afraid of going in because they thought they would disappear. But so we had that fun, and then went to see my dad, and we're visiting, and I brought up the movie, and I asked him if he had seen it, and he said, no, I haven't, and he said, I hear it's pretty good, and I said, yeah, I think you might like it. You want to watch? And he said, yeah. So I went out and rented a copy, and we all sat around and watched the movie. I'm sitting next to him on the couch, and I kept glancing over to him throughout the movie at some of the more emotional parts, and I could see he was kind of taken by it. And then when the movie ended, I looked over and I said, well, what'd you think? He said, well, I liked it. It was good. I liked it a lot. And he said, but I don't think I can go out and play catch with you today. And I said, that's okay, Dad. I'm glad it made you think about doing that. I said, maybe we can do that another time. Of course, we never did, and he died a few years later. The biggest one I wish I could have shared, I wish he could have lived long enough to have seen the Cubs win the World Series back in 2016. That would have really been something. He would have just loved it, and that's the one thing I wish could have happened. But the Field of Dreams, it was a great memory and a great experience, and just really glad that I was able to do that with him.
That was Terry Powers from Michigan, who recently retired. Enjoy your retirement, Terry, and thanks so much for sharing your story with me. I want to touch on something Lawrence Kessenich said about everyone loving the novel Shoeless Joe when it came out. Kinsella won the Houghton Mifflin Prize for the novel, which, as Kessenich said, is not awarded every year, but only when they felt like someone truly deserved it. So just think about all the writers, all the books that come out every year, and W.P. Kinsella's book stood apart. It was fantastical. It involved ghosts and time travel, and yet it was grounded in emotion and age-old themes. So what are the circumstances that create a writer with this kind of mind, this kind of imagination? Next time, in episode 2 of The Making of Field of Dreams, we dive into the mind and contradictions of William Patrick Kinsella.
Despise is the perfect word. I mean, despite like hated, loathed. I mean, there is not a word strong enough for what he felt about what he called the self-righteous, hypocritical, evangelical Bible thumpers.
Next time on Midnight Library of Baseball. If you think this show's worth $1, please donate at the website midnightlibraryofbaseball.com or through Podbean. You can also leave a rating or review on iTunes or wherever you listen to the podcast. The show is produced and edited by me, Ben Orlando. Music by Sergei Papkin and Ashot Danielyan. Good night.